My name is George Harold Millman. I'm an actor, playwright, and political activist. And this is my February Rebel Without a Clause video. Actually, I was meant to put up a video last Saturday, but for whatever reason things got on top of me, and here I am the following Friday putting it up. It's going to be about refugees in the UK, because I think there's been quite a lot of that about recently, with Trump, with Brexit, with this Mexico wall thing, which I don't really quite understand what it's about. Before I start, I must just say I'm in quite a fixed position here. The last video I made, which was the one on the matriarchy, which I created with my friend and flatmate Ji-young, we only realised after we'd filmed it that the sound quality was horrible. But you could still understand it, and we didn't really want to redo the whole thing because we'd said some quite good stuff, so we uploaded it as it was with an apology. And since then, I've realised that there's a problem with my MacBook, and for some reason I can't get the quality, or I don't know how, because I'm a bit of a technophobe, you see, but I don't really know how to make the quality as good as it really ought to be. So either I will fix that, because it used to be good, I used to be able to make really nice videos on that, I'll fix it, or I shall get an external microphone. In the meantime, here I am in front of my very old but very trusty and reliable, never ever goes wrong, iMac. And it takes me a second to remember what an iMac is, because I feel like they're a bit out of date now, but it's trusty and it doesn't go wrong, so thank you, iMac. I also have my cat over there, Slinky, or Puss as we like to call her. As we said last time, political videos need a lot more cats in them, but she's keeping out of the way of the video because she's shy. Anyway, 2 minutes in, so I guess it's time to start talking about what I want to talk about, refugees and immigrants in the UK, because there's been a lot about it recently. Most notably, something called the Dubs Amendment has been revoked by the government. Now, that came in last year, which was initially supposed to hold the government to accepting 3,000 new child refugees from Syria. Before it actually happened, this was changed so there wasn't a specific number, either an upward figure or a downward figure, that was going to hold the government to doing anything. But there were a lot of people who hoped that it could reach 3,000, but anyway, that's now been revoked. The Dubs Amendment was named after Lord Dubs, who was actually a child refugee fleeing the Nazis himself. So this is, I think, quite disturbing for anyone who has any sort of understanding of the conditions from which people flee for their lives from. Amber Rudd, who's the Home Secretary, said on Twitter, I don't have her exact tweet written down, but she said that she wanted to discourage such people from coming to the UK, which, to be honest, I just find quite obscene. I think if we are going to stop child immigrants from coming to the UK, we should maybe stop incentivising them by getting involved with the conflicts that cause them to come to the UK in the first place. But it really is just ridiculous. We're a part of a very important global community. Other countries which have less space than us have taken more than us. It's essentially the same approach that Donald Trump is aiming towards. But I just find it really obscene that we've done this. We're not fulfilling our responsibilities enough in the first place. And we just seem to be wanting to shirk our responsibilities to anyone who isn't from this country. Actually, we seem to want to shirk our responsibilities to people in this country already. We seem to just want to shirk our responsibilities towards people as a whole, as a matter of fact. But with regards to refugees, there is a lot of rhetoric around, are they really as young as they say they are, which I think is just utterly stupid for various reasons, which I'm actually not going to go into because I can't be bothered to, quite frankly. But yes, I think that it really is quite disturbing the way that we are very quick to blame refugees for the state of the NHS, for example. We talk about health tourism. It actually accounts for a very small minority of the problems with the NHS. The main problem with it is that it's not being funded enough, which actually is the case for all public services. But we have right-wing outlets like the Daily Mail, which incidentally Wikipedia no longer consider a reliable source. It just makes me wonder how we got to this point in the world where we are so suspicious of one another. And in a way, I think that this suspicion is a specific motive from people in power. I find it very concerning, and I find it quite obscene that we've revoked this Dubs amendment, and I think it's very typical of these British values that we supposedly have at the moment, and particularly as a Christian country, and I'll come on to that quite soon, but we seem to want to take all the benefits of everything for ourselves and avoid any sort of responsibility to anyone else. It's very disturbing, but whilst I'm about it, there's a film which I saw quite recently. The producer is Mark Don. He was actually supposed to be interviewed on Victoria Derbyshire, but for some reason his interview on the Victoria Derbyshire show was cut from the broadcast. But there is a wonderful documentary called The Asylum Market, which is on a slightly different note. It's more about how companies like G4S are exploiting asylum seekers and the appalling conditions of the homes that these people are being put in. But I shall put a link in the video description. It's only 25 minutes long, and I really encourage everyone to watch it because it is really eye-opening, and it says a lot about a lot of various problems that we have in our society today. There's what I was saying about our attitudes towards immigrants and refugees, but also in terms of privatising public services. There seem to be some quite large companies who seem to think that quality for the users is not especially important. I think that's something that we all need to talk about because maybe it's something that's not as known as it should be. A couple more things I'm going to mention. I work sporadically for a young people's charity called Envision. When I was 17, which is 6 years ago, God, I can't believe it. And when I was 17, I raised with my team £593 for WaterAid because we were involved in this charity that was helping young people create social change from their own backyard. And once you've done it as a young person, you can sort of get involved with the organising of it for future groups, which is what I've done. I think I'm the only person from my original group that's still doing that. But the scheme under it now is something called the Community Apprentice, which is essentially about improving standards of various different things within your own community, which is a good thing. But the one thing that it makes me question, especially as someone who was involved before it was called Community Apprentice, is what the word community in that context actually means. It's something I raised at an Envision meeting quite recently. What do we view as being our community? Because Theresa May said quite recently, if you're a citizen of the world, you're a citizen of nowhere. And I really object to that. There's a fine line between patriotism and tribalism, and I don't really think of patriotism as being a particularly important thing because I think it's quite a straw man for a lot of the problems in our world. I find that we have a culture where we are trying to distinguish our own very concentrated group of people as being a separate community from the rest of the world, and I consider the work that I did for WaterAid, for example, as being something for my local community, even though my actual local community was not remotely affected by it, because I think your community is, in effect, anything that you wish it to be, and anything that makes you consider that could be you. I did discuss with the other grads that we could create a project where we talk about the need for a community, but also what we understand as being the community and whether it's just our very specific town or city, or whether it's our country, or whether it goes wider than that, because I would always argue that it goes wider than that. And I think that's something that we really need to consider when we talk about our attitudes towards refugees, our attitudes towards immigration. I think the media has gone to great pains to emphasise the us and them. I don't think that that's a productive way to run a society. And I think there are some much better means of working and creating social change than thinking about things like that. I'd like to finish with something relating to God and Christianity. And I don't normally talk about anything remotely religious because it doesn't normally come into what I write about. But I think it's quite important in this case. I personally don't really consider myself a Christian, although I am incredibly spiritual. I don't really like to settle myself into saying I believe this, because I think the moment you do that, you cut yourself off from anything that might contradict that. And I think it's better to look throughout this world at things that are beautiful and things that create kindness and laughter and beauty, whether they come from Christianity or Islam or Buddhism or Hindu or anything else, or anything that isn't remotely related to religion. But I think that we have some interesting discussions about religion at the moment. We have Theresa May, who is actually the daughter of a vicar, talking about how she is a very committed Christian, a very believing Christian. She's bragged that she would use nuclear weapons to slaughter millions of men, women and children abroad. I'm going to keep looking over here because that's where my notes are. She's introduced legislation as Home Secretary that would tear apart thousands of British families. If you want to read any more about this, there's a blog called What Kind of Monstrous God Has Theresa May Been Talking To?, which was published by my favourite blogger Thomas G. Clarke on Another Angry Voice. I shall put a link to that in the video description as well. It's a reasonable question. Why do people feel that they can consider themselves to be a Christian, which, for all intents and purposes, is a religion which is respected worldwide? Why do people feel that they can say that and earn that respect, but actually not fulfill the charitable and social responsibilities, which what I believe are quite important tenets of Christianity? I know many, many Christians who are thankfully a lot more charitable than that. There is a wonderful, I'm just going to read it to you, a wonderful thing by Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, concerning the Dubs Amendment, which I was talking about earlier on Twitter. I was saddened and shocked to read in the ministerial statement released yesterday that only 350 children will be received under the regulations in the Dubs Amendment. Our country has a great need of welcoming those in need, particularly the most vulnerable, such as unaccompanied children. Refugees, like all people, are treasured human beings made in the image of God who deserve safety, freedom, and the opportunity to flourish. Jesus commands us to care for the most vulnerable among us. The King will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." Matthew 25:40. The government's decision last year to take in vulnerable children was the right thing to do and was further evidence of the UK's leadership on the response to the Syrian and wider migration crisis. Our government's leadership on financial and technical support in the region and its leadership in resettling refugees from UNHCR camps is to be commended. However, I feel that this week's decision does not meet the spirit of the commitment that was given during the passage of the Immigration Act last year. I agree entirely with colleagues who have spoken out on this already, that for those of us who supported the Dubs Amendment, we believe that the government was committed to welcoming up to 3,000 children under this scheme. To end the scheme now when such a small proportion have actually entered the country is regrettable. Local authorities who are bearing the costs of the resettlement must be given the resources and time needed to meet our original commitment. You see, whatever religion you follow, I think that that should sum up the reason that you follow it. Belief in, I guess, looking out for those less fortunate than you. And if you're using it just as a way of gaining respect without really doing anything to earn it, then I find that very concerning. I've written other things like this at various points. Just this evening I put on the About Me section on my blog, The Rebel Without a Clause, a wonderful passage from The Railway Children about prisoners and captives, which I think is quite possibly one of the most amazing pieces of children's literature ever written, so feel free to check that out. I shall write something about something going on tomorrow, because tomorrow is Saturday, the day that I normally update my blog, and I will be more up to date with it next week than I was this week. This week was just a blip. So anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye.